Moving to Portland was supposed to be my fresh start. After everything that happened, I needed a change. A quiet place to regroup and rebuild. Portland, with its quaint charm and serene atmosphere, seemed like the perfect place. The old house I bought, nestled on a tree-lined street, had character. It was the kind of place where you could almost hear the echoes of the past in the creaking wooden floors and the soft whispers of the wind through the old windows. The house was everything I wanted: cozy, with an old-world charm that made it feel timeless. The previous owner had left behind some antique furniture, including a beautiful, ornate wall clock. It was a centerpiece in the living room, its brass pendulum swinging rhythmically, marking the passage of time with a soothing tick-tock that filled the otherwise silent rooms. The first night in the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. But as I settled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, moving is always stressful. I drifted off to sleep, the soft ticking of the clock my lullaby. I woke with a start in the middle of the night. The house was still, the only sound my own breathing. I glanced at the clock on my bedside table. 3:34 a.m. Strange, I thought. I could have sworn I heard something. I got up to check the house, making my way to the living room. There, in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains, I saw it. The wall clock had stopped. The pendulum was frozen mid-swing, the hands pointing unmistakably at 3:33 a.m. A chill ran down my spine. I stood there, staring at the clock, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, I told myself. An old clock in need of repair. I tapped the glass gently, but nothing happened. The hands remained stubbornly fixed at 3:33. I eventually went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind raced with thoughts and questions. By morning, I had convinced myself it was nothing more than a mechanical glitch. I wound the clock and reset the time, hoping that would fix it. But the next night, it happened again. I woke at precisely 3:34 a.m. to the same eerie silence. The wall clock, once again, had stopped at 3:33. This time, the sense of unease was stronger, and it lingered long after the sun came up. Each night, the clock stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m., and each night I woke moments after. The house, once a haven, began to feel different, ominous, almost. The ticking of the clock, once comforting, now seemed like a countdown to something I couldn't understand. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, and I had to find out what. The clock stopped again the following night at exactly 3:33 a.m. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar sense of dread began to creep over me. But this time, it wasn't just the clock. It was everything else. The unexplained noises, the moving objects, and the eerie cold spots that seemed to follow me around the house. The first strange noise I noticed was a soft whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it was coming from inside the house. I couldn't make out any words, just a faint, persistent murmur that seemed to ebb and flow, just on the edge of my hearing. I checked every room, every closet, but found nothing. Then came the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, echoing through the hallways at odd hours of the night. I'd lie in bed, heart pounding, listening as they approached my bedroom door, only to stop suddenly as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. More than once, I grabbed a flashlight and crept through the house, but I never found anyone. The most unsettling were the objects that seemed to move on their own. I'd leave a book on the coffee table only to find it on the kitchen counter the next morning. Doors I'd left open were mysteriously closed. One night, I woke to find every cabinet in the kitchen wide open, their contents undisturbed but eerily exposed. The logical part of my mind tried to come up with explanations. Sleepwalking, perhaps, or maybe I was just forgetting where I'd left things, but deep down I knew something else was at play. Then there were the cold spots. They appeared without warning, sudden drops in temperature that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd be sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I'd feel an icy chill pass over me, as if someone had walked right through me. No amount of blankets or hot tea could ward off the bone-deep cold that lingered long after the spot had moved on. As these occurrences grew more frequent, so did my insomnia. I found myself dreading the nights, unable to sleep, my nerves on edge. The once comforting darkness of my bedroom now seemed to harbor unseen threats. I'd lie awake for hours, listening to the house, every creak and groan amplified in the silence. My unease grew into a constant companion. During the day, I was jumpy and irritable, every unexpected noise making me start. At night, I was a prisoner of my own fear, too scared to sleep but too exhausted to stay awake. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, questioning my sanity with each passing day. I knew I had to find out what was causing these disturbances. There had to be a rational explanation. But as I delved deeper into the house's history, I began to fear that the answer was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Desperate for answers, I decided to delve into the history of my house. It was clear that something was seriously wrong, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. My first stop was the local library, a charming old building filled with dusty books and a wealth of knowledge about Portland's past. I started by searching through property records and old newspapers. It didn't take long to uncover a troubling pattern. My house had changed hands frequently over the past century, with most owners staying only a few years before selling it abruptly. There were no detailed reasons given in the records, just a series of short stays and quick sales. As I dug deeper, I found articles about some of the previous owners. One story from the 1980s caught my attention. A young couple had moved in and quickly started reporting strange occurrences. Unexplained noises, cold spots, and objects moving on their own. They had left after less than a year, claiming the house was haunted. Another article from the early 2000s mentioned an elderly woman who had lived there and complained of nightly disturbances, including the same phenomenon of a clock stopping at 3:33 a.m. The more I read, the more the pieces started to fit together. I wasn't the first to experience these horrors, and I probably wouldn't be the last. My unease turned to a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. There was something fundamentally wrong with this house, something that had been affecting its inhabitants for decades. I decided to talk to some longtime residents of Portland to see if they could shed any light on the situation. Mrs. Parker, an elderly woman who lived a few houses down, was more than happy to share her memories. She remembered the house's original owner, a man named Jonathan Graves. According to her, Graves was a recluse, rarely seen outside and rumored to be involved in some very dark practices. He was a strange man, Mrs. Parker said, her eyes wide with the memory. Kept to himself mostly, but there were always whispers about him. People said he was into black magic, that he'd made some kind of deal. A pact, they called it. Pact. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Could this be the key to the strange occurrences? I pressed her for more details, but she didn't know much beyond the rumors. Still, it was a lead, and it was more than I had before. I continued my investigation, speaking with anyone who might have information. A trip to the Portland Historical Society proved fruitful. They had records of Graves' life and death, including some of his personal belongings that had been donated after his passing. Among these was an old, leather-bound diary. When I opened the diary, my heart raced. The pages were filled with detailed accounts of rituals, incantations, and entries that hinted at a dark bargain made with an otherworldly entity. Graves wrote about the clock, describing how it would stop at 3:33 a.m. as a signal that the entity was near. He mentioned the pact, an agreement for power and wealth in exchange for something far more sinister. The diary confirmed my worst fears. Graves had indeed made a pact, and the house was cursed as a result. Each new owner had unwittingly stepped into a nightmare, their lives disrupted by the same dark forces that Graves had summoned. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to find a way to break the pact and free the house from its malevolent grip. But I also knew that confronting such a powerful force would be dangerous, perhaps even deadly. As I closed the diary, the weight of my next steps settled heavily on my shoulders. I had to prepare for whatever lay ahead, but at least now, I had a direction, a way to fight back against the darkness that had taken hold of my home. Determined to uncover the full story behind the horrors of my house, I ventured into the attic. It was a dusty, dimly lit space, filled with old furniture, trunks, and forgotten relics of the past. As I sifted through the clutter, my eyes caught sight of a small, locked chest tucked away in a corner. The key was nowhere to be found, but a few strikes with a hammer soon broke the rusty lock. Inside, I found an assortment of aged documents, photographs, and, most intriguingly, a leather-bound diary. The cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. This had to be it, the key to understanding the true nature of the curse that plagued my home. With trembling hands, I opened the diary and began to read. The entries were written in a precise, elegant script that belonged to none other than Jonathan Graves, the house's original owner. As I delved into his words, a chilling tale unfolded before me. Graves had been a man consumed by ambition and greed. Despite his wealth, he craved more power, more influence. His diary detailed his fascination with the occult and his obsession with ancient texts that promised unimaginable power. It was in these texts that he learned of a ritual, a pact with a dark entity that could grant him everything he desired. He described the preparations meticulously, the symbols he needed to inscribe, the sacrifices required, and the exact timing of the ritual. According to Graves, the entity he summoned was powerful, malevolent, and ancient beyond comprehension. He referred to it only as the Dark One. On a moonless night, Graves performed the ritual. He offered his own blood and chanted the incantations that would call forth the Dark One. In exchange for power and wealth, he agreed to bind the entity to his house, allowing it to claim the souls of anyone who lived there. The clock, Graves wrote, was a crucial part of the pact. It would stop at 3:33 a.m. each night, marking the hour when the veil between worlds was thinnest, allowing the Dark One to manifest. The consequences of this pact were severe. Graves detailed the immediate benefits he received, fortune and influence beyond his wildest dreams. But he also noted the price. The Dark One demanded constant appeasement, and any failure to comply resulted in dire repercussions. The house became a vessel for the entity's malevolence, a trap for unwary souls. As I read on, I felt a growing sense of dread. Graves had bound not only himself but all future inhabitants of the house to this dark fate. Each subsequent owner, including myself, was doomed to suffer the consequences of his insatiable greed. The strange occurrences, the stopped clock, the cold spots, they were all manifestations of the Dark One's presence, reminders of the pact that still held power. The final entries in the diary were the most disturbing. Graves wrote of his growing fear and regret, of the constant torment inflicted by the entity. He described how he tried to find a way to break the pact, but each attempt only seemed to anger the Dark One further. His last entry was a desperate plea for forgiveness, a hope that someone, someday, would find a way to end the curse. As I closed the diary, a heavy silence filled the attic. The weight of Graves' actions and the knowledge of the pact's existence pressed down on me. The truth was horrifying. My home was a prison for an ancient evil, and I was its latest victim. But unlike Graves, I had no intention of succumbing to despair. I would find a way to break this pact and free myself and my home from the Dark One's grip. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but armed with the knowledge from Graves' diary, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The nights following my discovery of Graves' diary were tense and filled with an almost palpable dread. I knew that confronting the entity was inevitable. Armed with the knowledge of the pact, I prepared myself as best as I could. I gathered every protective charm and symbol I could find, placing them strategically around the house. I even memorized some counter-rituals from the diary, hoping they might offer some defense. Then, one fateful night, the clock struck 3:33 a.m. I lay in bed, wide awake, heart pounding in my chest. The familiar, ominous silence filled the house. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and an oppressive weight seemed to settle over me. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. I knew the entity was near. A shadow moved in the corner of the room, darker than the surrounding darkness. As it approached, the figure began to take shape. A tall, gaunt form with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. Its face was a grotesque, ever-shifting mask of horror, features contorting in an endless cycle of twisted expressions. The entity exuded a malevolence that chilled me to my core. The Dark One, it spoke without words, its thoughts invading my mind like a swarm of locusts. Images of torment and despair flooded my consciousness, each more horrifying than the last. I could feel its hunger, its insatiable desire to consume my very soul. Why do you resist? The question echoed in my mind, a sinister whisper that threatened to unravel my sanity. You are mine as all before you were. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stood my ground. I will not be your victim, I declared, my voice trembling but defiant. I know about the pact, and I will break it. The entity's laugh was a sound of pure malice, a bone-chilling cacophony that reverberated through the room. Many have tried, it hissed. All have failed. The room began to shake, objects flying off shelves, the walls creaking as if under immense pressure. I clutched the diary tightly, reciting the counter-ritual with a fervor born of desperation. The words felt foreign and ancient on my tongue, but I pressed on, my voice growing stronger with each syllable. The entity recoiled, its form flickering like a candle flame in a strong wind. I could see the pain and fury in its eyes, and for a moment, I thought I might actually have a chance. But then it lunged at me, its long, bony fingers reaching for my throat. The next moments were a blur of chaos and terror. I fought back with everything I had, using the charms and symbols as weapons, each contact eliciting a hiss of anger from the entity. It was like fighting a living nightmare. Every movement was slow, as if I was wading through thick mud, and the air seemed to crackle with dark energy. The entity's grip tightened around my throat, its touch icy cold and suffocating. I could feel my strength waning, the edges of my vision darkening. In a final, desperate act, I grabbed the clock from the wall and smashed it against the entity's head. The force of the blow broke the clock and sent pieces flying, and the entity let out a deafening roar. Staggering back, I continued the incantation, pushing through the pain and fear. The entity writhed and screamed, its form disintegrating into a swirling vortex of shadows and light. With one final, ear-piercing shriek, it vanished, leaving the room in a stunned, eerie silence. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling from the encounter. The clock lay in pieces around me, the time frozen forever at 3:33 a.m. The house was still, the oppressive weight lifted, but I knew the battle was not yet over. The entity had been driven back, but the pact remained. I had won this round, but the final confrontation was yet to come. With newfound determination, I vowed to end the curse once and for all. The fight for survival had only just begun, and I was ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. In the days following the confrontation, the house seemed quieter, almost peaceful. The nightly disturbances ceased, and for the first time in weeks, I managed to sleep through the night. But I knew it wasn't over. The entity had been driven away, but the curse of the pact still lingered. Determined to end it once and for all, I returned to Graves' diary, hoping to find some overlooked clue. I read through each entry meticulously, piecing together the fragmented history. It wasn't until I reached the final pages that I found something I had missed before. A cryptic note written in the margin of the last entry. It was an address, scrawled hastily, as if in a moment of panic. Intrigued, I decided to follow this lead. The address led me to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods on the outskirts of Portland. The air was thick with the scent of pine and decay as I approached the dilapidated structure. Inside, the cabin was a time capsule of Graves' dark practices. The walls were lined with books on the occult, symbols etched into the wooden beams. In the center of the room, a large, ornate chest caught my eye. Its lock was rusted, but with a bit of effort, I managed to pry it open. Inside the chest, I found the final piece of the puzzle, an ancient leather-bound tome. The book was filled with rituals, incantations, and detailed accounts of pacts with dark entities. As I flipped through the pages, one passage in particular stood out. It described a binding ritual, a way to permanently seal the entity and break the pact. But the cost was steep. To my horror, I realized that the ritual required the blood of the original pact-maker's descendants. My heart sank as the truth dawned on me. Graves' family line had ended abruptly, and without a living descendant, the curse couldn't be broken in the conventional sense. But there was another way, a loophole Graves himself had mentioned in his diary. The blood of someone who willingly entered the house and confronted the entity could be used as a substitute. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was the substitute. As I absorbed this terrifying revelation, the air in the cabin grew cold, and the familiar oppressive presence returned. The entity materialized before me, its form more menacing than ever. It knew I had discovered the truth and was ready to reclaim its hold. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice a sinister whisper. "The pact is eternal." But I was prepared. With the tome in hand, I began the binding ritual, chanting the incantations with unwavering resolve. The entity roared in fury, but it was powerless against the ancient words. The room shook violently, the very fabric of reality seeming to tear apart. As I completed the ritual, I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my very essence was being torn from me. The entity let out one final ear-piercing scream before it was sucked into the tome, the book slamming shut with a thunderous crash. The silence that followed was deafening. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted and bleeding, but alive. The oppressive presence was gone, and the house was finally free. In the aftermath, I realized the true cost of my actions. The binding ritual had not only sealed the entity but also bound me to the house. I was now the guardian, forever tied to the place that had once been my tormentor. As I looked around the cabin, the chilling revelation settled over me. I had broken the curse, but at a great personal cost. I was the latest and hopefully the last in a long line of victims. The house would remain safe as long as I stayed, but I could never leave. The story ends with me sitting in the quiet house. The clock forever stopped at 3:33 a.m. The air is peaceful, the entity banished, but the price of victory is eternal vigilance. The house, now free of its dark past, stands as a testament to the horrors endured and the sacrifices made. And as I sit here, I know that the true horror lies not in the dark entity, but in the lengths one must go to confront and overcome it. Enjoyed it? Give a like and spread the terror. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any scares. Join our dark community.